The porch light above Silas Mercer's door was always too yellow, the kind of tired bulb that made rain look like honey and turned the porch boards the color of tea. But that night, just after cold rain began to stiffen into sleet, the light found a mother bobcat collapsed against the bottom step. Silas saw her before he understood what he was seeing. At first, she was only a low, spotted shape in the wet dark, pressed so flat to the boards that she seemed part of the shadows. Then her head lifted half an inch. Two amber eyes caught the porch light, not glowing, not friendly, just terribly awake. Behind her, tucked beneath the old bench where his wife used to set geraniums, two small shapes trembled without making a sound. Kittens, not house cats, not strays, bobcat kittens, narrow-faced and tuft-eared, their coats dark with rain, their paws tucked under them as if stillness could save a life. Warm kitchen air slipped past his shoulder, carrying the smell of coffee grounds and onion soup left too long on the stove. The screen door creaked softly. Out in the yard, bare pear branches knocked together with a dry, hollow tapping. The bobcat's ears flattened. One ear had a small crescent missing from the tip. Her right front leg was drawn close beneath her chest, and her flank moved shallowly. Mud streaked her pale belly. Burrs clung thickly to her shoulder and ruff, round and bright under the porch light, stranger than any burr Silas had seen in his orchard. They were not dull brown cockleburs. They were pale gold, almost straw-colored, with spines that caught the light like tiny bits of sun. She had dragged them all the way to his door. A wild mother had brought her young here, not because she trusted him. Silas knew better than that. Wild things came because hunger chose for them, because pain narrowed the world, because some old map inside the body pointed toward shelter when every other place had failed. Still, she had come to his porch with the sagging left corner he kept meaning to fix, his porch where Nora had once sat shelling peas in a blue sweater, his porch where nobody had come needing him in a long while. "It's all right," he said, though he knew the words meant nothing to her. His voice sounded rusty. Since Nora had passed 3 winters earlier, whole days had gone by when he had spoken only to the radio, the pear trees, and a stubborn old kettle. Too much sound made the house feel emptier. He backed into the kitchen. The soup had begun to cling to the pot. He turned off the burner and stood with the oven mitt in his hand, not remembering why he had picked it up. On the sill, Nora's chipped blue mug held 3 dry paintbrushes. He reached for the phone. The county wildlife number was on a curled card beside the calendar. He had written it there years ago after a raccoon got trapped in the feed shed. When Ranger May Talbot answered, sleep still edged her voice, but it sharpened as soon as he said, "Mother Bobcat." "Do not approach her," May said. "Do not touch the kittens. Keep the doorway clear. Is she breathing steady?" "Not steady," Silas said, "but breathing." "Can you place water nearby without stepping toward her?" Silas looked through the open doorway. The bobcat had lowered her chin again, but her eyes stayed on him. The kittens were nearly invisible, except for one pale muzzle. "Maybe. 3 feet from the door if you can, then inside. Quiet. I'm calling Dr. Voss, and I'm on my way." When the call ended, the dial tone became a thin, lonely hum. He found the heavy ceramic bowl Nora had used for bread dough, filled it halfway, then stopped. It was too white, too bright. He set it back and chose an old metal pie tin instead, dented along one rim, dull enough not to shine. It seemed foolish, choosing dishes for a bobcat, but grief had taught him that small acts mattered when larger ones were impossible. He cracked the door wider with his hip. The mother lifted her head. Silas crouched slowly, knees complaining, pie tin balanced in both hands. He did not look straight into her eyes. May had once said predators read a stare differently than people did. So he looked at the wet boards, the leaves plastered flat, and the golden burrs caught in her fur. One burr had hooked near the torn ear, another clung beside her whiskers, making her blink in irritation despite her weakness. For 1 second, she wrinkled her nose as if offended, and Silas nearly smiled. There was dignity in that small annoyance. She was not a symbol, not a miracle, not a soft little thing sent to mend him. She was a wild mother having a terrible night and resenting every inch of it. He set the tin down just inside the porch line and nudged it outward with the toe of his boot. The water trembled. The kittens did not move. The bobcat watched the tin, then watched him. Her short, dark-tipped tail twitched once against the boards. Not welcome, not trust. A warning, maybe, or simply the last strength of a creature still deciding whether life had left her any choices. Before he eased the screen door shut, he looked once more. Rain softened the edges of everything. The yellow bulb hummed above the mother's bent head. The kittens were pressed so close together they seemed to share one heartbeat. On the step between them and Silas's kitchen laid the pie tin, 3 feet from Mercy and still untouched. If this quiet kind of story offered comfort, a gentle like or subscription helped it travel, and the little circle listening would welcome each viewer's home place and the name of an animal that had marked their heart. Silas knew none of that in the moment. He only knew the soup had gone cold, the house had stopped feeling empty, and a wounded mother with golden burrs in her fur had chosen his porch as the place where she could no longer keep walking. He turned off the kitchen light so the doorway would seem less like a threat. Then he sat on the floor beside the closed screen, old bones aching, one hand near Nora's blue mug, and listened to the rain fall around 3 wild lives breathing in the dark. Silas Mercer had not always been the kind of man who measured a day by the sound of wind in bare branches. At 63, he still rose before dawn because his body remembered work, even when the orchard no longer demanded so much. He lived at the north edge of the Bitterroot foothills, where the paved road thinned into gravel near a line of lodgepole pine. His place was called Mercer Pears on an old wooden sign, though the word pears could only be read if the light struck it sideways. In September, the orchard smelled of sugar and dust. In October, it smelled of wet leaves and soft fruit in the grass. By November, when the night of the bobcat came, the trees stood mostly bare, their crooked limbs gray against the mountains, each one shaped by decades of snow weight and careful pruning. Silas knew every tree. He knew the Bartlett near the well pump had split in the hard freeze of 2009 and kept growing anyway. He knew the old Anjou by the fence gave crooked fruit, but the sweetest blossoms. He knew the little seckel Nora had planted by hand, laughing because the sapling looked like a broom handle stuck in mud. Nora had named that tree Miss Prim. Silas had pretended to object. Nobody names pear trees, he had told her. You do now, she had said. After that, the orchard had quietly filled with names. Silas still caught himself speaking to the trees under his breath. He asked Miss Prim to hold on through late frost. He called the leaning tree by the ditch Old Soldier and braced its trunk with a board he painted green, though no one saw it but him. Nora had been gone 3 winters. The house had learned her absence slowly, first in obvious places, the empty hook where her red raincoat used to hang, the quiet sewing basket under the parlor window, the second pillow that stayed too neat. Later it settled into smaller corners. No cinnamon in the oatmeal, no humming in the laundry room, no spoon tapping a stubborn jar lid. Silas kept her blue mug on the kitchen sill because moving it felt less like cleaning than admitting defeat. It was chipped at the rim, faded near the handle, and just large enough to hold paintbrushes, pencil stubs, and 1 pair of pruning shears too dull for real work. Every morning, he made coffee in the dented percolator, read yesterday's paper because the mail came late, and walked the porch before breakfast. The left step dipped when his boot hit it. He meant to replace the board. Instead, he stepped around it, with the easy loyalty a man gave to things that had grown old beside him. His closest neighbor, Annika Bell, lived nearly a mile down the county road and ran a small goat dairy with her teenage son, Theo. She came by on Saturdays when the weather held, usually bringing something wrapped in foil and pretending she had made too much. Silas pretended to believe her. Once she brought molasses bread so hard around the edges that even Theo made a face. "Good for hammering fence staples," Silas said. Annika laughed until she had to wipe her glasses. Small things still warmed the place when they could. A chickadee nested in the mailbox one spring and scolded him for collecting bills. A barn cat from nobody's barn walked through his kitchen once, inspected the room, sneezed at the stove, and never returned. Every fall, one pair rolled off the sorting table no matter how carefully he stacked them, as if the harvest insisted on a joke. But when the evenings came early, the house grew large around him. Silas had not been a man who feared quiet. He had always liked working without chatter, like the clean rhythm of ladder, basket, crate, and truck bed. Yet quiet after loss was different. It did not rest beside him. It filled rooms. It sat in Nora's chair. It waited at the top of the stairs. So he made habits. He oiled the gate latch every first Monday. He swept the porch on Thursdays. He filled the wood box before supper, even if there was enough wood. He kept a lantern beside the back door, because foothill storms arrived with their shoulders hunched and their fists full. He also kept distance from wild things. Not unkind distance, respectful distance. The kind born from years of watching deer strip saplings and foxes ghost along the ditch before daylight. He had seen bobcats now and then, usually only a flicker of tawny movement beyond the lower orchard. Once, he found neat oval tracks near the irrigation line. Another time, he saw a scat mound placed off flat stone by the fence, as if the animal had signed the border with quiet authority. That was bobcat language May Talbot had told him when she stopped by to check reports of a sick raccoon near the creek. "They like to know what belongs to them," she had said. Silas had looked over the orchard, the weathered sign, the sagging shed, the trees that still produced even when he forgot to ask them politely. "Don't we all?" he had said. He had never tried to see the bobcat closer. He never left scraps out. He never called or whistled. He only noticed the small evidence of her passing. A feather pile beneath the wild plum. A narrow trail through frost-bent grass. Scratches on the cedar post near the ravine, high enough that she must have stretched tall, flexing her claws with quiet authority. Once before dawn, he heard a low rasp from the lower fence line. Not loud, not quite a growl. It was followed by the quick thump of rabbits scattering under brush. Silas stood at the kitchen window with coffee cooling in his hand and felt for the first time in weeks that he was not the only living thing awake with old business on its mind. He did not know then that the same silent hunter had a crescent missing from one ear. He did not know she carried two young through the rough grass beyond his property. He did not know golden burrs grew thick in a neglected cut beyond the ravine, catching at fur and cloth and anything desperate enough to push through them. He only knew the orchard was colder, nights were coming hard, and somewhere beyond the pear trees a wild mother was learning the shape of his land before she reached his door. For the first half hour after he called May, Silas did not move farther than the kitchen floor. He sat with his back against the cabinet beneath the sink, wool socks getting cold where the draft slipped under the door. The house had settled into its small night sounds, the stove cooling, a log popping in the front room, the drip from the gutter he had promised to fix before snow. On the other side of the screen, the bobcat breathed. Sometimes Silas could hear it, Sometimes he only imagined he could. A faint pull of air, a pause, another pull. The rhythm was uneven enough that his own chest kept trying to match it, as if a man could lend steadiness through a door. The kittens stayed under the bench. One had tucked its face against the other's shoulder. The smaller one, no bigger than a barn kitten but built differently, peeked out once and then withdrew so sharply that its rump bumped the bench leg. The tiny clack made Silas look down despite himself. "Well," he whispered, "you're not graceful yet." The mother heard him, her head lifted, slowly, not far, just enough for the porch light to find the pale fur under her chin and the black bars along her cheeks. Her whiskers trembled, several bent sideways where Burrs had caught and dragged. She did not bare her teeth, she did not snarl, but her gaze held him the way winter held a field, firm. He had seen fear in animals before, but this was different. This mother was not trying to escape because she had decided his porch was safe. She was not fleeing because she had reached the end of what her body could bargain with. Need was not trust. He had learned that when Nora was sick. People had come with casseroles and bright voices. Silas had thanked them, resented them, and needed them, all in the same hour. Maybe this bobcat had spent all evening refusing help until the kittens behind her made refusal too costly. The pie tin remained untouched. Rain tapped on the porch roof. A gust pushed wet leaves across the boards, and one leaf stuck to the bobcat's flank. She flicked her skin in a small ripple of annoyance, then froze as if the movement had cost too much. The kittens noticed the leaf and stared at it with grave suspicion. One lifted a paw, thought better of it, and tucked the paw back beneath its chest. Silas almost smiled again. Then the mother shifted, and the smile vanished. She tried to gather her front legs under her. Her left paw pressed flat, her right one folded, weak and wrong, and she sank back with a breath that was not a cry, but still carried pain. The kittens made no sound. That frightened Silas more than noise would have. These two had learned silence too early. He turned his head toward the phone, willing May's truck closer along the dark road. To keep himself from opening the door again, he studied the details he could see. The missing crescent from the mother's ear, the mud dried in short streaks along her shoulder, the golden burrs, each one round and bristled like a tiny hooked star. They were scattered on her fur and on the porch boards, a trail of little suns from the bottom step to where she lay. He had lived on that land 36 years and knew the burrs around his orchard. These were not his. Some came from the lower ditch, brown and stubborn. Some from burdock near Annika's lane, dark and oval. These golden ones belonged elsewhere, maybe beyond the ravine where the county road curved past abandoned grazing land. Nora used to call that place the Yellow Cut in late fall. Silas had not walked it in years. The ground there dropped unevenly, and old wire hid under weeds. The thought moved through him quietly, then settled. She had come from danger. The mother lowered her muzzle toward the water. Silas held still so completely his back began to ache. Her nose almost touched the tin. One kitten leaned out from under the bench, ears rounded and damp, eyes fixed on its mother, as if waiting for permission to believe in the world. A drop fell from the porch roof into the tin. The bobcat jerked back. The kitten vanished. Silas let out a breath so soft it barely stirred his shirt. "Fair enough," he murmured. "I don't trust leaky gutters either." At that, the old house gave a little groan in the wind, as though agreeing. The absurdity warmed him for a moment. A man on a cold kitchen floor, apologizing for plumbing to a wildcat who would have preferred never to meet him. Nora would have laughed quietly when kindness became awkward. The bobcat's ears moved toward the yard. Silas heard it then, faint at first. Tires over gravel. Slow, careful. A truck coming without hurry. Headlights slid between pear trunks and painted the wet grass silver. The mother stiffened. Her shoulders rose despite her weakness. The short tail twitched once, then twice. Under the bench, the kittens pressed backward until Silas could see only the pale commas of their muzzles. He lifted one hand, palm down, though she did not know the gesture. "Easy," he whispered. May's truck stopped near the gate, not by the porch. The engine went quiet. For several seconds, nothing happened. That restraint told Silas he had been right to call. She did not slam a door or stride forward with a flashlight. She let the night remain itself. Then her voice came softly from the yard. "Silas? Here. Stay inside." He nodded before remembering she could not see him well. The bobcat did not run. She could not. But she dragged herself half an inch sideways, not away from danger, but toward the kittens, placing her body more fully between them and the world. It was the first thing Silas truly understood about her. Not her injury, not her fear, not even the mystery of the golden Burrs. Her body was failing, but her first thought was still the young behind her. And in that rain-dark doorway, with May waiting in the yard, and the porch light trembling above them all, Silas felt the old closed rooms inside him open just enough for one fragile promise to enter. He would not make her trust him. He would simply try to be worthy of the place where she had fallen. May Talbot did not come up onto the porch until the bobcat allowed the night to settle around her again. She stood in the rain beside the pear tree called Old Soldier, hood pulled low, one hand resting on the latch of her truck as if even a door sound might be too much. Her flashlight stayed pointed at the grass, where sleet shone like broken thread. Behind her, Dr. Helena Voss waited beneath the anjou tree, gray braid tucked under a wool cap, canvas medical bag against her side. She did not hurry. She only watched with the patience of someone who knew fear had to be given room. Silas opened the kitchen door only an inch. May lifted 2 fingers. Wait. So he waited. Waiting had become a language in his life. He had waited beside hospital beds, for phone calls, through late frosts to see if blossoms would survive. But this waiting had a body. It breathed on the other side of the screen. The bobcat still had not touched the water. Her eyes followed May first, then Helena. Her torn ear flicked toward each small noise. When one kitten bumped the old flower pot, the mother made a low, rasping sound, hardly more than breath over stone. The kitten froze. "Good mother," Helena whispered. Silas felt the words lodge somewhere tender. May spoke without looking at him. "Silas, do you have raw chicken?" "Plain, no seasoning." "In the freezer. Thaw a little, not hot, small pieces. Slide it no closer than the water." He moved through the kitchen softly. The freezer drawer stuck, as it always did. He tugged once, muttered at it, then glanced toward the porch as if the bobcat might judge him. On the sill, Nora's blue mug held 3 paintbrushes and a pencil worn nearly to nothing. He wrapped chicken in a towel and ran cool water over it until it softened enough to cut. His hands shook more than he liked, not because of the knife or even because of the wild animal at his door. Something helpless had come close, and helplessness always found the cracks in a man who had once failed to save what he loved most. He cut the pieces small and placed them on an old pie plate with faded green apples around the rim. Only 2 plates from that set remained. He wondered whether a bobcat cared about green apples. The thought eased him just enough to breathe. When he returned, May had crouched near the yard edge, not approaching, only watching. "Slow," she said. Silas crouched. The bobcat's gaze snapped to him. The screen door had a narrow gap at the bottom where the frame had warped in summer heat. Using the handle of Nora's old broom, he pushed the plate through that gap, inch by inch. It scraped softly over the porch boards. The mother lifted her lip without sound. Silas stopped. The plate sat 3 feet from her forepaws. beside the untouched water. "Good," May said softly. "Now back away." Silas backed into the kitchen and sat again on the floor, because standing felt too large. For a long time, nothing happened. Rain softened to mist. The porch light hummed. Somewhere in the orchard, a deer stamped once and bounded away. The kittens remained hidden, though one tiny ear showed under the bench, round and dark-tipped, turning toward the smell of chicken. The mother smelled it too. Her nose moved first. Not her head, only the small black-pink nose, working with delicate seriousness. Then her whiskers shifted, and one bent whisker caught on a golden burr near her cheek. She blinked twice, offended again. She was still herself beneath pain. She did not eat. She stretched her neck toward the plate, then stopped, eyes returning to Silas. He lowered his gaze to his hands, rough and square, nicked by years of pruning. He tucked them under his arms so they would not seem like reaching. Minutes passed. The larger kitten crept forward first. It came on its belly, one paw, then the other, nose quivering, ears too big for its narrow face. The mother made that breathy rasp again. The kitten flattened so quickly its chin hit the boards. Silas had to press his lips together. Not laughter, just the ache of something small being alive in such earnest confusion. The second kitten peeked out behind it, sneezed once at the wet air, and vanished backward as if embarrassed. May's mouth curved in the dark. The mother finally moved, with effort so slow it looked like thought becoming motion. She reached the plate and took one piece of chicken. She held it, turned her head slightly away from the people, and swallowed. Then she nudged another piece backward with her muzzle, not toward herself, toward the bench. One kitten darted out, snatched it, and tripped over its own front paws, retreating. The old flower pot wobbled. Silas held his breath until it settled. "There now," Helena whispered. The bobcat drank after that. 3 small laps, then a pause. 2 more. Her tongue barely disturbed the water. When she finished, she laid her head down again. Her body remained between the humans and her young, yet her chin rested nearer the pie tin, as if the distance between terror and necessity had narrowed by an inch. May did not move closer. Helena did not open her bag. Silas understood then that help did not always look like rescue. Sometimes it looked like staying small in your own doorway. Sometimes mercy had to sit 3 feet away and wait to be believed. By midnight, sleet had become cold silver dust on the porch rails. The bobcat had eaten 4 pieces and given 3 to the kittens. The smallest kitten discovered the dent in the pie tin and tapped it once with a paw, then startled at the sound. Silas covered his mouth, and May looked down to hide her smile. When the mother's eyes finally closed for more than a breath, May only whispered, "We watch. Morning will tell us more." Silas nodded. Inside, the soup had spoiled, the coffee had gone bitter, and his legs had fallen asleep. But the porch no longer felt like a border between his life and the wild dark. It felt like a narrow place where both had agreed, for one hard night, not to harm each other. And 3 feet from his door, the mother bobcat slept with golden burrs in her fur, while her kittens breathed under Nora's old bench. Morning did not arrive all at once. It seeped slowly into the orchard, gray and cold, laying a pale wash over the pear trunks and the wet grass. The mountains behind the pines stayed hidden in low cloud. Every fence wire held a row of bright drops. The porch boards smelled of rain, old cedar, and the faint sharpness of wild fir. At some point before dawn, May had made him sit in the kitchen chair instead of on the floor. She had come in quietly, leaving her boots by the mat, and warmed coffee without asking. Helena remained near the porch window with a small pair of binoculars, studying the bobcat from inside, where her presence felt less like pursuit. The mother was awake. She had shifted during the night, not far, but enough that one kitten now lay against the curve of her belly, while the other slept beneath the bench with its nose on the old flower pot saucer. The smaller kitten twitched in a dream and made a sound no louder than a squeak from a damp shoe. The mother's ear moved toward it without opening her eyes. That tiny motion softened the room. May whispered, "Still mothering." Silas wrapped both hands around Nora's chipped blue mug, though there was no coffee in it. He had picked it up by mistake and had not put it down. The ceramic felt cool where the chip cut into his thumb. "She needs help," he said. "She does," Helena answered, "but she needs to believe we are not the worst danger." Outside, the bobcat opened her eyes. For the first time, with daylight thinning the dark, Silas could see the full map of her. She was smaller than he had imagined in the night, maybe 20 pounds beneath the soaked coat and Burrs, but there was nothing delicate about her. Her shoulders were compact, her paws broad, her cheek fur barred in black and cream. Her left ear bore that crescent tear, clean-edged and old. One whisker on the right side bent upward at an odd angle, giving her a permanently skeptical look. The look suited her. She lifted her head, saw the humans in the window, and held still, not relaxed. Never that. But she did not flatten herself. She did not scrape backwards. Her eyes moved from May to Helena to Silas, and then to the pie tin. The tin was empty, except for a little rainwater and one chicken shred the kittens had ignored because it had stuck to the rim. The bold kitten crept out and sniffed it. The shred clung. The kitten tugged, stumbled, and sat down hard. For one small second, even Helena smiled. The mother watched her kitten with stern patience, as if she had already endured enough foolishness before breakfast. Then she pushed herself higher on her good foreleg. The injured paw remained tucked, but she managed to bring her head into the light. That was when Silas saw the burr near her chest. It was larger than the others, caught deep in the thick fur where her pale ruff met the tawny spots of her shoulder. Overnight the rain had washed away some mud, and now the burr shone clearly, golden, not yellow like dead grass, golden like wheat held under a lantern. Its hooked spines were long and curved, and at its center clung a thread of faded blue twine. Silas leaned toward the window before he could stop himself. The bobcat's eyes cut to him. He sat back. May noticed anyway. "What is it?" "That burr," he said. Helena raised the binoculars again. "Unusual color. I've seen those." Silas spoke slowly because memory was opening a gate he had left shut for years. "Not in the orchard, beyond the old ravine. There's a cut where a man named Calder kept sheep before the county took the road around. Nora called it the Yellow Cut. Golden burr grass grows there thick in fall." May looked toward the lower pasture, though the ravine could not be seen from the kitchen. "Any wire down there?" "Old fence. Some of it buried, some not." Helena's mouth tightened, but she did not say more. The bobcat lowered her head and began worrying at the burr with her teeth. She caught it, tugged once, and stopped. Pain or weakness pulled her back. Her ears flattened, not at the people this time, but at the burr itself. She gave it a look so offended and weary that Silas let out the smallest breath of laughter. "Can't blame you," he murmured. "I've had arguments with that place too." May glanced at him. "Did you ever win?" "Not once." The warmth came and went quickly, but it left the room less brittle. Helena set the binoculars down. "I can prepare a mild sedative dart if she declines. But if she keeps drinking and eating, we may do better, letting her stabilize first. Less risk." Silas nodded because both women seemed to expect it, though he had no authority over a wild mother on his porch. That humbled him. His land, his house, his step, and yet the most important choices belonged to the animal who had collapsed there. He had spent years thinking loneliness meant nothing needed him anymore. Now need had come, and it demanded restraint instead of action. May asked for another small plate. Silas chose the green apple one again. The kittens had already inspected it and survived, so it seemed approved. He cut more chicken, smaller this time, while May mixed a shallow bowl of water with a little electrolyte solution Helena provided. The liquid smelled faintly mineral, like a rain barrel after lightning. When Silas crouched by the door, the mother watched his hands. He remembered to lower his eyes. He remembered to move the plate with the broom handle. He remembered 3 feet. The plate scraped out. This time, the mother did not lift her lip. She only watched. The smaller kitten came forward, sneezed at the new smell, and backed into its sibling so hard, both vanished under the bench. May pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Silas looked down at the broom handle, pretending great interest in the worn wood. Then the mother did something none of them expected. She reached one paw toward the plate, not the injured one, and rested it lightly on the rim. She did not eat. She did not pull the food close. She simply held the plate still, as if claiming the offering without surrendering her pride. Her eyes stayed on Silas. For the length of 5 quiet breaths, he did not move. Then she took one piece, swallowed, and nudged 2 pieces backward for the kittens. May whispered, "There's your breakthrough." But Silas did not think of it as his. It belonged to the mother, to her caution, to the fierce little kingdom she still guarded beneath his dead geranium bench. Outside, the golden burr on her chest trembled when she breathed. It pointed toward a place beyond the ravine, toward wire and old mistakes and the hard road she had taken to reach him. Silas touched the chip in Nora's mug and understood that the mystery had opened wider. The mother had not come from nowhere. She had come through something. And if the golden burrs could speak, they had begun very quietly to tell him where. By the 3rd morning, Silas had learned the porch had its own weather. The yard could be still, the orchard silver with frost, but the porch held the nervous air of 3 wild bodies deciding whether the world would allow them to live. It smelled of wet cedar, raw chicken, cold metal, and the musky leaf-bitter scent the mother bobcat left wherever she rested. May had set careful rules. Food twice a day. Water always. No sudden light at night. No opening the door unless the bobcat had shifted away from it. No leaning over her. No trying to name what did not belong to them. Silas obeyed most of them. The last one gave him trouble. He did not speak the name aloud, but in his mind he began calling the mother Sable, because her ear tips were dark and because she carried the night in her. The bold kitten became Patch, for the pale smudge over one eye. The smaller one he thought of as Finch, because it made one tiny, startled chirp whenever it surprised itself. May would have told him not to get attached. He knew attachment was a gate that opened inward and was difficult to close again. Still, names came to lonely houses the way weeds came to fence lines, quietly, without permission. Each morning, he rose before dawn, filled the percolator, set oatmeal to warm, and checked the porch from the side window instead of the door. Sable usually lay beneath Nora's old bench, body angled toward the yard. Even injured, she refused to put her back fully to the open dark. The kittens had grown braver inside their small kingdom. Patch liked to test everything with one paw. A dead leaf, the pie tin, the broom handle. The corner of the blue blanket May had allowed Silas to slide near the bench after the first cold night. Patch would tap, recoil, wait, then tap again, as if conducting official business. Finch preferred ambush. It hid behind the broken flower pot and sprang at its sibling with great seriousness, only to topple sideways because the porch board sloped near the bad step. The first time it happened, Silas choked on his coffee, trying not to laugh. Sable looked at the kitchen window with such disapproval that he lifted his mug in apology. "I know," he whispered. No laughing at children. The mother ate better by then, though never greedily. She took the first pieces for herself, only when both kittens stayed back. If they crept too close, she nudged food toward them with her muzzle. Her injured paw remained tucked, and the golden burr on her chest still clung stubbornly. But her eyes had sharpened. She watched every hand, boot, shadow, and moving branch with equal suspicion. Helena came once a day, parking below the gate and observing from the yard or through the window. "She needs recovery," Helena said on the fourth day. "Then she needs distance." Silas looked at Sable through the glass. Patch had fallen asleep with one paw in the empty pie tin. Finch was using the blue blanket as if it had personally defeated it. "Distance," he repeated. Helena's expression softened. Kind distance. That became the shape of his days. He set food down, then left. He refreshed water, and disappeared from the doorway. He swept only the far half of the porch, leaving the boards near the bench messy with paw prints and leaf pieces. He used the back door when he needed firewood, walking clear around the house rather than make her move. At noon, sunlight sometimes reached the porch through the pear trees. One afternoon, Silas sat just inside the closed kitchen door, mending an old work glove. He did not need the glove. It had a hole in the thumb and no partner. Patch came out from under the bench, stretched both front paws, and opened its mouth in a silent kitten yawn. Then it saw the glove. Silas had laid it near the threshold, just inside the kitchen. Patch crouched. Its hindquarters wiggled once, badly hidden behind the screen frame. Patch darted forward, hooked one claw through the screen gap, snagged the glove by the cuff, and pulled. The glove stuck. Patch pulled harder. The glove slid an inch. Silas sat motionless, eyes lowered. Patch wrestled with the glove as if dragging down a mountain lion. Finch emerged to help, stepped on the cuff, startled itself, and sprang backward into the flower pot. The pot rolled. Both kittens vanished. The glove remained half under the door. Sable looked from the glove to Silas. Her bent whisker gave her that skeptical look again. Then, with slow dignity, she reached one paw out and pinned the glove where it lay, ending the whole affair. Silas whispered, "Fair ruling." For the first time, Sable did not flatten her ears at his voice. She only blinked once. Not trust, perhaps. Not affection. But not alarm either. That single blink stayed with Silas all afternoon. The orchard felt different now, as if every sound might matter. A jay's complaint in the fence row, a squirrel's claws on bark, the soft shift of Sable turning in her sleep. At supper, Annika left a covered dish on the back stoop. The note said, "For you, not the Bobcat," underlined twice. Inside was chicken stew and 3 biscuits shaped oddly like stones. Silas ate one by the sink. "Good for patching fence posts," he told the empty kitchen. For once, the emptiness did not answer back so loudly. That night, as frost thickened on the porch rail, Sable rose with effort and limped 2 steps toward the water. Silas saw the pain in the careful placement of her paw and gripped the table edge until it passed. She drank, then turned her head toward the kitchen window. He was there. She knew he was there. She did not come closer. She did not need him the way a tame animal needed a person, but she had begun to include his quiet shape in the room beyond the glass, the man with the blue mug and the habit of looking away. Silas lowered the lamp. Outside, Patch slept against Finch in a heap of spotted fur. Sable lay between them and the yard, golden burrs still caught near her chest, wild eyes open to the dark. Inside, Silas washed the pie plate and understood that his life had not become full again, not like before, but it had become attended. Something breathed near his door, and he was careful because of it. On the 6th day, the sun came out shyly. It slipped through the clouds in pale strips, laying weak gold across the orchard rows, and turning the frost on the grass to beads of glass. The porch boards steamed where the light reached them. Beyond the fence, the pines dripped steadily, each drop striking old leaves with a soft ticking sound. Silas carried his coffee to the kitchen window and found the porch empty. For one terrible second, his heart lurched. He set the mug down too hard. Coffee jumped over the rim and spotted the sill beside Nora's blue mug. Then the old pear crate moved. It sat on its side near the bench, a crate Silas used for fruit. He had placed it there the afternoon before to block the draft through the porch rail. Sable must have inspected it during the night and judged it acceptable, because the two kittens had claimed the shadow beneath it. Patch appeared first. Upside down, one spotted paw slid out from under the crate, then another, then a round face with one pale smudge above the eye. Patch lay on its back, batting at a strip of loose crate wood, as if the orchard had offered it a private toy. Finch crouched behind, waiting with grave patience, then sprang too soon and landed on Patch's stomach. Patch folded around Finch like a closing pocket knife. Both kittens froze, surprised by the consequences of their own bravery. Silas covered his mouth. Sable, hidden just beyond the bench, opened one amber eye and gave the kittens a look that seemed older than the mountain. She did not rise. She only flicked the dark tip of her short tail once against the blue blanket. The kittens separated at once, pretending nothing had happened. Silas whispered, "That's right. Dignity first." Sable's ear turned toward him. The crescent notch on the left one made the edge look bitten by the moon. Her injured paw still stayed close to her chest, but she rested more evenly now. The golden burr near her ruff had loosened after rain and drying, hanging by fewer hooks, though none of them dared remove it yet. The porch had become a place of ceremonies. Silas set food out after sunrise, always on the green apple plate. May said any flat plate would do, but the kittens had decided this one belonged to them. When Silas tried a plain saucer one morning, Patch sniffed it, backed away, and sat down with such solemn refusal that Silas took the saucer back inside. "Critic," he murmured. He washed the apple plate by hand after that. Water went into the dented pie tin. The blue blanket stayed near the crate, but never under the mother unless she chose it. The broom handle rested beside the door like a proper tool of diplomacy. Even the bad porch step had become part of the arrangement. Finch used the dip in the board as a hiding place, though the kitten was plainly visible to everyone except itself. At noon, Anika came up the back path with a loaf of bread and strict instructions from Theo. "He says the little one is not invisible," she told Silas quietly, setting the bread on the counter. "But we're all supposed to act like it is." Silas nodded with full seriousness. "I can respect military strategy." Anika looked through the window and softened. Patch had found an old pear stem and was carrying it sideways like important prey. It tripped over the stem twice, refused to drop it, and finally placed it before Sable with great ceremony. The mother sniffed it once, closed her eyes, and left it there. Finch crept forward, touched the stem, then startled when it rolled. Anika pressed a hand to her chest. "Mercy." Silas did not answer. He did not trust his voice. Joy had returned to the house in a form so small he could almost miss it if he moved too fast. It was not the bright joy he remembered from harvest suppers, when Nora filled the kitchen with neighbors and steam clouded every window. It was quieter than that. It came in quick paw taps, in a kitten's offended sneeze, in the way Sable's eyes half closed when sunlight reached her shoulders. It did not erase grief. Nothing did. But it set something warm beside it. That afternoon, Silas sat at the table repairing the porch lantern. He had not used it since Nora died, because the electric light was easier, and the lantern belonged to evenings when they walked the orchard together. The wick was stiff. The glass was smoked. He cleaned it slowly, listening to the kittens rustle under the pear crate. Sable watched him through the screen. Her trust remained careful, shaped like distance. If he stood too quickly, her ears flattened. If he opened the door too wide, she shifted between him and the kittens. But when he sat in the same chair, at the same time, with the same blue mug near his elbow. She accepted him as part of the weather. That was enough. Near dusk, Helena came to check on them. She stayed at the side window and smiled when Patch missed Finch's tail and landed with both paws in the pie tin. Water splashed up. Patch leapt backward in pure offense. Finch tapped the wet board and then shook one paw as if the porch had betrayed it. Even Sable looked briefly less severe. "She's stronger," Helena said, still guarded, but stronger. Silas nodded. He felt pride and fear together. The better Sable became, the closer she came to leaving. That was the proper ending for Wild Things, he knew. Proper did not mean easy. After Helena left, the sky cleared to a deep blue, and the first stars appeared above the orchard. Silas lit the repaired lantern and set it inside the kitchen window, just near enough to cast a warmer glow. Sable lifted her head. The kittens settled beneath the pear crate, bellies full, paws twitching. Patch's stolen pear stem lay beside them like treasure. Finch had one ear folded inside out, from sleep. The mother looked from the lantern to Silas, and then, very slowly, she rested her chin on the edge of the blue blanket. Not fully, only the edge. Silas sat still, one hand around Nora's chipped mug, and let that small choosing fill the room. Outside, frost gathered on the rails. Inside, the lantern flame bent and steadied. For the first time in 3 years, the house held evening without feeling empty. The first warning came in through the soles of Silas's boots. He felt it before he saw anything unusual. A slight change in the yard when he stepped out before sunrise with the empty ash bucket. The ground had hardened overnight. Frost silvered the grass in brittle blades, and every breath tasted faintly of iron and wood smoke. The orchard was quiet, in the way land became quiet when weather was holding itself back. Then his boot crushed something that did not belong near the back step. A golden burr. It clung to the edge of the rubber sole, pale and hooked, bright even in the blue hour before dawn. Silas stood with the bucket in one hand and stared down, while chimney smoke drifted low across the yard. The burr had not come from Sable's fur. This one was dry, fresh, and whole. It had traveled in somehow from beyond the orchard. He picked it free with a twig, not his fingers, and set it on the chopping block. By habit, he looked toward the porch. Sable was already awake. She sat at the far corner, near the railing, not lying on the blue blanket, not tucked beside the pear crate. Her body made a dark, compact shape against the frost. Her torn ear faced the lower orchard, and her nose worked steadily, drawing in scents Silas could not read. Patch and Finch slept beneath the crate in a spotted heap, unaware that their mother had become a statue of listening. Silas did not speak. He had learned that mornings belonged to her first. But when he moved toward the kitchen door, Sable turned sharply. Not at him, past him, toward the side yard where the old deer trail slipped between two pear rows. Her mouth opened a little. She tasted the air. May had once called it phlegm-like, though bobcats did it subtly. To Silas, Sable was reading a message written too faintly for human eyes. At breakfast she did not eat. Patch tried to help by patting the green apple plate as if the food might wake up and explain itself. Finch sniffed the chicken, sneezed, and backed into the pie tin, making a small metallic complaint. Normally Sable would have flicked an ear at such foolishness, but that morning she did not seem to hear them. She watched the lower fence. Silas drank coffee he did not want and rubbed his thumb along the chip in Nora's mug. "Something's got her worried," Anika said when she arrived with eggs and stood beside him at the window. "Maybe a coyote," Silas said. "Maybe." Neither sounded convinced. Theo had come with her, tall and narrow in a green coat, trying hard to look casual. He had been allowed only as far as the kitchen, and only if he used what Anika called his church feet. He moved so slowly, Silas almost told him bobcats respected reverence, not frozen teenagers. Hatch noticed Theo's boot through the screen and crouched behind the pear stem it had claimed days before. The kitten's tail gave one dramatic twitch. Theo whispered, "I think I'm being hunted." Silas said, "By 12 ounces of authority." Anika covered a smile with her scarf. Even Sable glanced back, not softened exactly, but aware of the small human warmth gathering behind the glass. For a heartbeat, the kitchen felt easy. The percolator clicked. Theo's ears reddened because Finch was staring at him upside down from under the crate. Anika left 3 brown eggs in a bowl and said they were for Silas only, since apparently everyone on the property had developed dietary opinions. Then Sable rose. The change passed through the room. She stood carefully, still favoring the right front paw, and crossed the porch with that silent, rolling movement that made her seem less injured than she was. At the far rail, she stretched her neck and rubbed her cheek once against the post. Not affection, marking. The black bars along her face moved against weathered cedar, leaving a message from the glands near her mouth. Then she limped to the bad porch step and did it again. Silas felt the old board dip beneath her weight. "She's marking the house," Theo whispered. May had said bobcats marked territory when unsettled. Silas remembered the neat scat mound on the flat stone, the claw scratches on the cedar fence, the quiet declarations wild things made because boundaries mattered. The porch had become part of Sable's map. That should have pleased him. Instead, it tightened something under his ribs. After Anika and Theo left, Silas walked the fence line alone. He did not go past the lower gate. He only followed the inside edge of the orchard, where fallen pears had softened into dark gold beneath the trees. Jays scolded from the wild plum. A wind came down from the pines, carrying the cold smell of snow not yet fallen. He found 3 more burrs, one caught in the hinge of the lower gate, one near the irrigation ditch, one snagged in grass beside a print too large for the kittens and not shaped like Sable's careful, uneven step. Silas crouched slowly. The print had softened at the edges, but it held the roundness of a canine track. Coyote, perhaps. Maybe a roaming dog from farther down the county road. Maybe something else that had followed scent, hunger, or the same old path through the yellow cut. He thought of Sable bringing her kittens through that burr grass, injured and silent. He thought of her placing herself between the porch and every moving thing. He thought of how many dangers a wild mother had to measure before dawn. The orchard no longer felt simply lonely or peaceful. It felt watched. That evening, Sable refused to settle beneath the bench. She moved from rail to step to crate, pausing often to listen. Patch tried to pounce on her tail and was gently blocked by one stern hind paw. Finch dragged the stolen glove a proud 2 inches and then fell asleep with its chin on the cuff. Silas warmed his hands around the coffee mug and let those little scenes steady him. Still, when darkness thickened beyond the porch light, Sable's eyes stayed fixed on the old ravine. The golden burr on the chopping block waited beside the back door. Silas did not throw it away. He set it in a saucer by Nora's blue mug, where he could see it every time he passed, a small bright warning from a place he had not wanted to remember. The frost came before the sun. It laid itself over the orchard in the dark, quiet as breath on glass, whitening the grass between the pear rows and turning the fallen leaves stiff at their curled edges. When Silas stepped into the kitchen after 5, the window above the sink held a pale skin of ice in the corners. The house smelled of banked ashes, cold coffee grounds, and the mineral chill that crept through old walls before winter truly arrived. He knew something was wrong before he looked at the porch. No scrape of kitten claws came from beneath the pear crate, no small bump against the pie tin, No irritated flick of Sable's tail against the blue blanket. Silence sat too neatly outside the door. Silas set the percolator down without filling it. The porch light still burned yellow in the gray dark. Beneath it, the bench stood empty. The overturned pear crate rested on its side, its shadow hollow. The blue blanket lay twisted near the bad step, half pulled from the place where Sable had last rested her chin. The green apple plate from the night before had been pushed to the rail, one bit of chicken frozen to its painted rim. Sable was gone. Patch and Finch were gone. For a moment, Silas did not breathe. He opened the kitchen door slowly, though there was no one there to startle. The cold met him hard. His boot touched the porch board where Sable had lain, and the board gave its familiar soft complaint. "Easy," he whispered out of habit. The word fell uselessly into the empty air. He crouched beside the blue blanket. It held no warmth now. A few tawny hairs clung to the wool. One tiny paw print crossed the corner, then another, both pointing toward the steps. Near them lay the pear stem Patch had carried like treasure, snapped in two. Silas picked it up, then set it down again. He did not know why touching it felt too much like touching a thing that had belonged to someone. At the edge of the porch, frost revealed what darkness had hidden. Tracks. Sable's prints were deeper than before, uneven where her injured paw had spared itself weight. Two smaller sets clustered around hers, skipping and crossing in nervous little bursts. The kittens had not been carried. They had walked. The trail went down the steps, across the yard, and toward the lower orchard. Silas followed as far as the porch rail, then stopped, because May's voice lived in his head. Do not crowd her, do not chase, do not turn help into pursuit. But the orchard beyond the yard looked too still. A thin line of golden burrs dotted the frosted grass like dropped beads. He went back inside for his coat, moving faster than his knees liked. At the table he knocked over Nora's blue mug. The paintbrushes rattled out, and the dull pruning shears slid across the wood. Nothing broke. Still, the sound made him flinch. "Sorry," he murmured, though the kitchen was empty. His hands fumbled with the phone. May answered on the third ring. "They're gone," Silas said. No greeting, no explanation, only that. May was quiet for 1 second. "How long?" "I don't know. Before dawn. Tracks toward the lower orchard. Do not follow into the ravine alone." "I know, Silas, I know," he said again, softer. She heard what was under it. "I'm coming." After the call, he stood at the back door with his coat open and his hat in one hand. Outside, a crow called once from the pines. He could not stay inside. He stepped off the porch and followed the tracks only through the open yard, keeping well back, telling himself he was not chasing, only reading. The frost made every print clear. Sable had paused near the chopping block where the first fresh burr had been found. One kitten had climbed briefly onto a low round stone, leaving 4 perfect prints on the white surface. The other had slid in the grass, its small hind feet making a smudged comma. Even in worry, Silas saw them. Patch investigating the stone as if it might be food. Finch losing balance on frost and pretending afterward that slipping had been planned. The warmth of those imagined moments hurt. At the lower pear row, Sable's tracks changed. They circled once beneath Old Soldier. Scratches marked the frost at the base of the trunk, shallow but deliberate. She had stretched up despite her injury and raked her claws against the bark, marking before she left. Silas laid one hand on the old tree. "So she told us," he whispered. Frost melted beneath his palm, darkening the bark. Beyond Old Soldier, the tracks pointed to the lower gate. The gate stood open, not wide, only a foot or so. Enough. Silas had latched it the evening before. He remembered the click because the latch had pinched his glove. Now it hung loose, rimed white, moving slightly in the wind. At the hinge, a golden burr clung to the metal. Below it, pressed in the mud where frost had not fully hardened the ground, lay another track, canine, larger than the one near the ditch, fresh enough that its edges held. Silas's stomach tightened. He looked past the gate, toward the slope that led to the old ravine and the yellow cut beyond it. Low fog lay there in strips, hiding the ground. The burr grass shimmered faintly gold where morning light began to reach it. Sable had not simply wandered. Something had drawn or driven her back. Maybe scent, maybe danger. Maybe some unfinished map in her wild mind had told her the porch was safe for healing, but not for staying. Silas wanted to call her name, though he had never spoken it aloud. Sable. A human name for a wild mother who owed him nothing. He did not call. Instead, he closed the gate with careful hands and stood, listening to the ravine. No kitten chirp came back, no leaf rustle, no soft pad of paws over frost. Only the wind moved through golden burr grass, and the first hard knowledge settled in him that love could arrive on a porch, breathe beside a door, fill a house with small foolish sounds, and still vanish before breakfast. When May's truck finally turned into the drive, Silas was standing by the lower gate with frost on his sleeves, the snapped pear stem in his pocket, and his eyes fixed on the place where the tracks disappeared. May arrived with her truck lights still on, two pale cones reaching through fog and pear branches. She did not ask Silas if he was sure. She looked at the lower gate, the burr caught in the hinge, and the canine print pressed beside it. Then she took a field pack, orange flagging tape, and a small radio from the cab. "You didn't go down," she said. Silas shook his head. Good. The word should have comforted him. It only reminded him that obedience had kept him beside a gate, while Sable led her kittens toward whatever waited below. May crouched over the tracks without touching them. Her gloved finger hovered above Sable's uneven print. She was moving fast here, May said, not running, pushing. Because of the kittens? Could be. Could be scent. Could be something passed near the porch, and she chose to pull them away. That was the trouble with wild lives. Their decisions were filled with reasons people could only guess at afterward. Anika came before they left, breath smoking beneath a knit cap. Theo followed with a thermos and a paper sack. He had packed biscuits, 2 eggs, and an apple bruised almost like a heart. "For later," Theo said. Silas put the apple in his coat pocket. "Looks official." "It's search food," Theo said. May almost smiled. "Then it counts." That warned the cold for one brief moment. So did Anika tying Silas's loose bootlace, and Theo placing Patch's snapped pear stem beside Nora's blue mug, as if the kitten might need it again. They followed the tracks through the lower gate. The land dropped beyond the orchard in a slow, uneven slope. Pear trees gave way to wild plum, then chokecherry and pine saplings bent by early snow. Frost melted where sun touched it. Every step released the smell of cold mud, crushed sage, and old leaves. Sable's trail was clear at first. Her prints moved between tufts of dry grass, the injured paw landing lightly, the other 3 digging deeper. The kitten's tracks kept close, sometimes between hers, sometimes veering toward small distractions. One kitten had paused beside a mouse hole. Tiny prints circled it twice before hurrying on. Silas knew at once that it had been Patch, unable to pass a mystery. A few yards later, a mark in the mud showed where Finch had slipped down a bank and scrambled up again. 4 little claw lines climbed towards Sable's deeper print. Silas pictured the smaller kitten chirping in offense, then acting as if the hill had insulted it personally. He smiled, and the smile hurt. May marked the places with orange tape, because human minds needed a way to remember where fear had passed. At the ravine edge, the fog thickened. The old cut lay below, half hidden in a pale gray fold of morning. Golden burr grass grew thick along the slope, its seed heads glowing faintly even under cloud. Silas had avoided that place since Nora's last autumn. She had once leaned on his arm there and said the yellow weeds looked like a field trying to remember summer. Now the Burrs snagged at May's pants and Silas's coat sleeves, tugging them back with tiny hooked hands. They found the first sign near a fallen fence post. A clump of tawny fur caught on barbed wire. Not much, but enough to still the air around them. Golden burrs clung around it. Below the wire, the ground showed churned leaves and a smear where something had slid low. May knelt. She came through here, she said. Probably the night she was hurt. Maybe again this morning. Silas stared at the fur. He remembered Sable pinning the glove with one paw, nudging food backward for the kittens, resting her chin on the edge of the blue blanket, and choosing for one evening not to fight the warmth offered to her. He had told himself she was wild and temporary. He had believed saying that would protect him. It had not. Farther down, the canine tracks crossed the Bobcat trail. 2 sets, maybe coyote. May read them slowly, then looked toward the thicker timber. No blood, she said gently. No signs they caught them here. Silas nodded because he understood she was offering him the only mercy the ground could give. They searched the ravine for more than an hour. May called softly now and then, not Sable's name, only a low sound meant to announce human presence without pressure. Silas did not call. The name sat behind his teeth like a prayer. They found kitten prints beneath a juniper. They found a rabbit trail disturbed by sudden movement. They found Sable's scratch marks on a rotten log, high and fresh, a territorial warning carved despite pain. Even frightened, she had told the ravine she was still there. Then the trail broke. At the far side of the cut, hard ground and pine needles swallowed the prints. Burr grass ended at stone. The canine tracks scattered. The fog lifted just enough to reveal empty timber rising beyond them. Dark trunks, wet branches, silence. Silas stood with one hand on a cold pine and listened until his ears ached. Nothing answered. May removed her hat and rubbed the bridge of her nose. We'll keep looking along the ridge. I'll set a camera near the lower gate. But for now, we should go back before we trample more sign. Back. The word felt cruel. On the climb home, Silas moved slowly. Burrs clung to his pant legs. One stuck to his glove, bright as a small accusation. Theo's bruised apple bumped his pocket, reminding him people were still trying to feed him because he had forgotten how. At the porch, the empty pear crate waited on its side. Silas set the green apple plate near the rail anyway. May did not tell him not to. Annika watched from the kitchen window, arms folded tight. Theo placed fresh water in the dented pie tin, carefully, 3 feet from the door. Evening settled early. Silas sat beside the screen with Nora's blue mug near his knee and the snapped pear stem on the sill. Outside, the orchard blurred into gray. The plate stayed untouched. The water held the last light. For the first time since Sable had appeared, the house felt empty, not because no one was there, but because someone wild and guarded and fiercely alive had been there. And the silence remembered her shape. By the second evening, Silas had learned the cruel patience of listening for a sound that might never come. May had set a trail camera near the lower gate and another along the ravine path. She had checked them twice, finding raccoons, 1 mule deer, a red fox with a narrow face, and the shadow of a coyote passing far down the cut before dawn. No Sable, no Patch, no Finch. The green apple plate stayed on the porch. Every morning Silas washed it, filled it, set it out, and pretended the motion was practical. Every evening he brought it back untouched, the chicken stiff from cold, the painted apples looking foolishly cheerful under his hands. Annika told him to eat. Theo stacked wood by the back door, without being asked. May stopped by at odd hours and never said the words he feared. Helena called once, her voice gentle enough to make him grip the receiver harder. "No sign can mean many things," she said. Silas understood what she was offering. He also understood what she was not promising. On the third day, snow threatened but did not fall. The sky stayed low and white, pressing the color out of the orchard. The pear trees stood bare and patient. Old Soldier's trunk wore the scratches Sable had left before she vanished. 4 shallow lines in the bark that Silas touched whenever he passed. He found himself apologizing to the porch. Not aloud at first. Then, once near dusk, while sweeping Burrs from the bad step, he murmured, "I kept your plate ready." The step creaked beneath him, familiar and tired. He almost laughed at himself. A man could become strange when worry had nowhere to go. He had spoken to pear trees for years, to a blue mug, to a snapped stem on the sill. Speaking to a porch was only one more small surrender. That evening, the air changed. It came first in the scent. A cold, grassy smell pushed up from the ravine, threaded with wet earth and something sharper, wild and musky beneath the damp. Silas stood at the kitchen sink with the plate in his hand, not yet set outside, and felt the skin along his arms lift. The orchard had gone quiet. No jay scolded. No branch tapped. Even the loose gutter seemed to hold its breath. Then from the lower gate came a sound too faint to be called a cry. A thin, startled chirp. Silas set the plate down so fast it clattered against the counter. He did not run. His body wanted to, but some deeper lesson held him still. Wild fear could be broken by haste. Hope could be broken too. He moved to the window. At first he saw only dusk gathering between the pear rows. The lower orchard was awash of gray trunks and pale grass. Golden burrs trembled along the fence line, each seed head catching the last light like a dim ember. Then one of the burr patches moved, a shape behind it, low, spotted, limping. Silas's hand found Nora's blue mug without looking. Sable came through the golden weeds as if she had been carved out of the dusk and given just enough strength to cross one more field. She was thinner. Her coat looked rough with burrs and dried mud. The old crescent in her ear showed clearly against the pale sky, and the golden burr near her chest was gone, leaving the fur there ragged and flattened. But she was alive. Behind her, Patch stumbled out of the burr grass, carrying something in its mouth. Perhaps a dead leaf, perhaps nothing worth carrying at all. Finch followed so closely it nearly walked into Sable's hind leg, then stopped, shook one paw with great offense, and tried to bite a burr off its own toes. Silas bowed his head. The sound he made was not quite a sob and not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a room inside him opening too quickly. Sable paused at the lower gate. The gate was closed now. Silas had checked it 3 times that afternoon. She stood before it, sides moving hard, eyes on the house. Her injured paw barely touched the ground. Patch looked through the bars, then tried to squeeze under and got its shoulder stuck for one undignified second. Finch sat down, as if waiting for better management. Silas reached for his coat. Slow, he whispered to himself. He called May with one hand, while pulling on boots with the other. She's back. May inhaled sharply. On the porch? Lower gate. Kitten's with her. I'm coming. Don't approach too close. Open the gate and step away if you can do it safely. Silas hung up and took the green apple plate. Each step from porch to gate seemed to travel through every hour of the last 3 days. Frost crackled under his boots. The pie tin waited empty on the porch behind him. The yellow light came on with its soft hum, spilling across the bad step, the blue blanket, the overturned pear crate. Sable watched him, her body lowered, not fully crouching, but ready in the way only wild animals could be ready, even when exhausted. Patch dropped its precious leaf. Finch pressed against Sable's back leg. Silas stopped 10 feet from the gate. He did not say her name. He wanted to. The name had lived in him through every empty hour. But he understood now that love did not give him ownership over even a syllable. Instead, he lowered his eyes and spoke to the latch. "All right," he said softly. "I see you." The latch was stiff with cold. It gave a small metallic click. Silas opened the gate just wide enough, then backed away, leaving the green apple plate on the ground inside the fence. He retreated to the porch and sat on the bad step, despite the cold rising through his coat. For a long moment, Sable did not move. Then Patch came first, of course. The kitten slipped through the opening, sniffed the plate, and sneezed directly into it. Finch followed, more cautiously, stepping over Patch's tail with great care, and then tripping anyway. Sable watched them both enter. Only when they had crossed the fence did she follow. She passed the plate without eating. She passed the chopping block, the pear crate, the place where her old tracks had frozen and melted away. At the porch steps, she stopped and looked at Silas. Not soft, not tame, alive. Silas lowered his head as the two kittens climbed onto the porch, clumsy with cold and burrs. Sable came last, limping hard, and settled between them and the yard beneath the yellow light. The house, which had been holding its breath for 3 days, seemed to breathe again. May reached the porch before full dark, but she did not step onto it. She stood in the yard with one hand lifted low, palm turned toward the ground, speaking in the same quiet voice she used for frightened deer caught in fencing. Helena came behind her with the canvas medical bag, her braids silver in the porch light, and her boots dark with thawing frost. Sable lay beneath the yellow bulb, with Patch and Finch tucked against her ribs. The mother had eaten only 2 bites from the green apple plate. She had let the kittens take the rest. Burrs clung to them all, little golden hooks caught in cheek fur, belly fluff, and the soft backs of their legs. Patch had one burr stuck behind an ear and kept shaking its head with great seriousness. Finch had collected 3 in its tail fur and seemed personally wounded by vegetation. Silas watched from inside the kitchen, hands wrapped around Nora's blue mug. He wanted to help with his whole body. That was the problem. Wanting could become reaching. Reaching could become fear. Fear could drive Sable back toward the ravine before anyone could protect her wounded paw, her hungry young, or the fragile trust that had survived 3 missing days. May looked at him through the screen. "We need the crate near the porch, not on it." The rescue crate had been brought earlier and left by the woodpile, covered with a brown tarp so it looked less like a trap and more like another awkward object the house had acquired. Silas carried it slowly to the bottom step while May watched Sable's ears. The bobcat lifted her head. Silas lowered his eyes at once. The crate smelled faintly of disinfectant and old straw. He hated that smell because it made kindness seem official and frightening. He set it down, opened the door, and backed away. Helena prepared food with something mild mixed in, not enough to force deep sleep, only enough to calm pain if Sable accepted it. The choice, as much as possible, would remain hers. The plate went just inside the crate. For a long while, Sable only stared. Patch approached first, as always, and stuck its nose through the crate door. May made a soft clicking sound under her breath, not to lure, only to steady herself. Patch stepped in, stole one piece of food, stepped backward, and bumped into the crate wall with a hollow thunk. Finch vanished behind Sable. Silas almost smiled and almost wept in the same breath. Sable rose slowly. Her injured paw shook when it touched the boards. She paused, breathing through the discomfort, then took one limping step toward the crate. Not because she trusted metal doors, not because she had become gentle, because the kittens had eaten, because the porch was known, because the humans had kept distance when distance was all she could bear. She put her head inside. A minute passed, then another. When she stepped fully into the crate, Patch tumbled after her, indignant at being excluded from any new cave. Finch hesitated, chirped once, and followed with a tiny leap over the threshold that cleared almost nothing. Helena closed the door with no flourish. Sable struck the side once, not hard, enough to say she knew what had happened. Then she turned around, pressed herself around the kittens, and went still. Silas felt the sound in his ribs. "I'm sorry," he whispered. May heard him. "You're keeping them alive." He knew that. They set the crate in the back room, not the kitchen, where the light was dim and the window faced the quiet orchard. Helena examined Sable through the crate bars first. Only after the calming food settled did she work with careful hands, a towel between herself and Claus, May assisting, Silas standing at the door because there was no need for more people close. The injury was not as terrible as his fear had made it. Strain, swelling, a shallow cut hidden beneath fur, soreness from dragging through wire and burr grass. No broken bone, no deep wound. Sable would need rest, food, and time. The burrs would need removing in stages, not in one frightening battle. "Good news," Helena said softly, "but she is worn thin." Patch objected to having Burrs loosened from its ear by biting the towel and refusing to release it. Finch discovered the corner of the blue blanket Silas had placed beside the crate and tried to pull it through the bars, one determined mouthful at a time. Even Sable, dazed and watchful, gave the blanket a slow look, as if recognizing its color from the porch. Silas cut a smaller square from it later, with May's permission, and placed it just inside the crate after Helena finished. He did not use Nora's sewing scissors. He used his own work knife, because some things deserved not to become too sentimental in front of others. Still, when Sable rested her chin near that square of blue wool, he had to turn toward the window. Outside, the orchard blurred under the first light snow of the season. Flakes drifted past the glass, sparse and slow, melting when they touched the dark ground. Old soldiers stood near the lower gate, marked by Sable's claws. The gate latch shone faintly where frost gathered again. Healing began without celebration. It began with water warmed to take the bite off. It began with softened food and dim rooms, and no hands reaching unless hands were needed. It began with May setting a schedule on the refrigerator, Anika leaving stew in a covered pot, and Theo taping a note to the back door that said, "Wild patients require quiet," including Silas, which made even Helena laugh. Silas slept in the chair by the back room that night, not too close to the crate. Several times he woke to the rustle of kittens. Once, Patch batted at the metal latch from inside and looked disappointed when it did not become a toy. Once, Finch sneezed so sharply that it startled itself awake. Near dawn, Sable shifted, opened her amber eyes, and looked directly at Silas. He did not speak. He only lowered his eyes and rested one hand on the blue mug beside him. After a while, Sable closed her eyes again. It was not forgiveness. It was not surrender. It was healing, cautious and unfinished, under a roof that had finally learned that love for a wild thing meant preparing to let the door open when strength returned. Sable stayed in the back room for 11 days. Not peacefully, not gratefully. A wild thing did not become grateful because people had done what they hoped was right. She endured the crate, then the larger pen May helped set against the wall, with the bitter patience of a mother who understood her strength was still returning. By then, the first snow had come and gone twice. It never stayed long. It silvered the orchard before dawn, softened the tops of the fence posts, then melted into dark beads on the bark. By noon, the house smelled of wood smoke, wet wool, and the clean straw Helena changed with careful hands. The back room stayed dim, curtains half drawn, so Sable would not feel displayed. Patch healed fastest because Patch believed every object existed to be investigated. The water bowl, May's bootlace, the latch, the corner of Helena's field notebook. Once, Patch managed to hook one claw through the edge of Silas's trouser cuff while he knelt to slide in food. The kitten tugged once, found the man too heavy to steal, and retreated with offended dignity. Finch grew rounder and braver in smaller ways. It still startled at its own sneeze, but it began sleeping with one paw resting through the wire mesh, toes spread open as if touching the room without admitting to it. Her injured paw slowly took weight again. The swelling eased. Burrs came free one by one, placed in a jar on the shelf because Theo insisted they were evidence, and Silas did not have the heart to throw them away. When Helena finally loosened the last golden burr from behind Sable's shoulder, the bobcat turned her head and gave the empty air a slow, suspicious sniff, as though checking whether the enemy had truly left. Silas stood back and whispered, "You won that argument." Sable looked at him. Then she looked away. That was as close to agreement as she ever came. On the 12th morning, May said the words Silas had been expecting and dreading. Soon. He was washing the green apple plate at the sink. His hands paused under the warm water. "She's ready?" "Ready enough to choose," May said. "We can open the pen into the porch enclosure first. Let her test herself. After that, she decides." Silas nodded. He had known the proper shape of this kindness from the start. Still, knowing a door must open did not keep the hand from trembling on the latch. Annika came over with stew and said nothing about goodbye. Theo brought a small cardboard sign he had made for the kitchen table. It read, "Please do not be dramatic around the Bobcats." Underneath in smaller letters he had added, "This includes Mr. Mercer." Silas read it, then looked over his glasses. Theo shrugged. "May said calm energy matters." "She did she?" "Yes, sir." Annika bit the inside of her cheek to keep from laughing. That afternoon, they opened the route from the back room to the porch. The screen had been secured. The porch rail had been fitted with temporary mesh, enough to give Sable a halfway place before freedom. The blue blanket, now missing one square, lay folded near the pear crate. The dented pie tin shone dully beside the bad step. Sable came out slowly. She paused at the threshold and smelled every board. Her cheek rubbed the doorframe once, then the porch post, leaving her message where fear had once left only mud. Patch bounded after her, overshot the blanket, and slid into the pear crate with a hollow wooden thump. Finch stepped out, saw the open sky above the railing, and flattened so low it looked like a spotted rug. No one laughed aloud. Silas pressed his lips together until they ached. For 2 days, Sable used the porch as a testing ground. She stretched. She climbed onto the bench. She sat beside the rail and watched the orchard with eyes that seemed to gather every moving thing. Jay, mouse, falling leaf, Theo's hat bobbing too high behind the woodpile. On the 3rd evening, May removed the temporary barrier. The orchard lay blue under dusk. Frost brightened the grass. Old soldiers stood at the lower row, still bearing Sable's claw marks. Sable walked down the steps. Patch and Finch followed. She did not look back until she reached the pear trees. Then she turned, not toward all of them, but toward Silas standing beside the door with Nora's blue mug in both hands. For a few breaths, the old man and the wild mother held the same quiet. Then she slipped between the trees. The kittens vanished after her, one smooth, one clumsy. Silas expected emptiness to rush in. Instead, the orchard seemed to receive them. Over the next week, signs appeared. Tiny paw prints crossed snow near Miss Prim. A golden burr rolled onto the porch with no human hand to bring it. The green apple plate remained untouched, but the pie tin was found tipped over twice, once with a kitten print inside it. Then Theo found the den. He did not mean to. He was helping Silas stack kindling near the old root cellar when he froze and pointed without speaking. At the far edge of the orchard, beneath a wind-thrown tangle of plum roots and dry grass, Sable had made a hidden hollow. Not close to the house, not far either, just beyond easy reach, exactly where a wild mother might place her young if she had decided the orchard belonged partly to them now. Patch sat outside the den with a pear leaf stuck to its head. Finch peered from behind one root, solemn as a church elder. Sable lay above them on the slope, her body still, her eyes on Silas. He backed away first, not because he was unwelcome, because he understood. That night, Anika set 4 bowls on Silas's kitchen table by mistake, then laughed at herself and took one away. Theo argued the Bobcats counted even if they refused soup. May stopped by to check the camera and left with Burrs on her sleeve. Helena called them the strangest extended household in the county. Silas did not correct her. He knew Sable was not his. Patch and Finch were not pets, not porch children, not little miracles arranged for his comfort. But the orchard had changed its boundaries. Family, he learned, did not always mean living under one roof. Sometimes it meant leaving space beneath the trees, fixing the gate latch, walking softly at dusk, and letting wild eyes watch from the grass without asking them to come closer. Winter settled around Mercer pears without asking permission. It came in layers, first as white breath over the ditch, then as frost that stayed in shade, then as soft snow along pear limbs like folded cloth. The orchard no longer smelled of fruit. It smelled of bark, cold iron, wood smoke, and old leaves under ice. Silas changed with it. He no longer went to the porch expecting emptiness or disaster. He went quietly because quiet had become part of the household. He carried coffee in Nora's blue mug, although he still did not drink from it, and stood just inside the kitchen door while gray light gathered along the boards. Some mornings there was nothing. Other mornings there were tracks. Sable's prints were easy to know, round and clean, one front paw still placing itself more carefully when the ground was hard. Patch's prints darted everywhere, a map of curiosity with no sensible destination. Finch's stayed closer to brush and fence posts, cautious loops that always returned to the den. The orchard had learned their rhythm. So had Silas. He repaired the lower gate latch every Monday, even when ice made the metal bite his fingers. He left the pear crate under the porch bench because removing it felt rude. He washed the green apple plate and stored it on the lower shelf, ready for emergencies, but no longer part of daily habit. Food was not left out unless May said it was needed. Wild bodies had to remember how to belong to the land. Still, small signs came. One morning, the dented pie tin was found upside down in the snow, 20 feet from where Silas had placed it. Patch's print circled it proudly. Another morning, Finch had crossed the bad step, leaving 5 careful paw marks in frost, then sat facing the closed door. Not begging, not waiting, only observing the strange den where the tall, quiet creature lived. Silas told Anika about it when she came with bread. "Maybe Finch is judging your housekeeping," she said. "Wouldn't be the first," Silas answered. After school, when weather allowed. He had grown serious about moving slowly. Once, while carrying kindling, he froze because Patch was watching him from inside a hollow stump. The kitten's pale eye smudge made it look deeply unimpressed. Theo whispered, "I have been evaluated." Silas took the kindling from him. "You passed, if you're still holding both shoes. That became a private joke. Anytime a tool went missing, Theo blamed Patch. When Silas found one work glove under the bench, with a corner chewed and no explanation, he put it on the porch rail and said, "Evidence is building." Sable watched these human rituals from a distance. She rarely came close in daylight. More often she appeared at dusk, a compact shadow moving between tree trunks, pausing near Old Soldier or the wild plum, her ear notch cutting the sky. She marked the cedar post by the lower gate, scratched frost from a fallen log, and sat with her back half turned, alert to the ravine, even in rest. She had not forgotten danger. Neither had Silas. May showed him the trail camera photographs. Coyotes still passed through the yellow cut. Once, a loose farm dog nosed along the ravine path before turning away. Sable appeared after midnight, watching with her body low. Patch and Finch were never far. "She's teaching them," May said. Silas looked at the photograph a long time, "teaching them not to need us." May's face softened. "That is the best thing she can teach." He knew it was true. The house had become less lonely, but not because it had filled. It had become less lonely because Silas had stopped asking every living thing to stay where he could see it. Some forms of love came and went through trees. Some left only tracks by morning. Some trusted a man most when he did not follow. On the coldest night of January, that lesson deepened. Wind came hard from the mountains, shaking the pear limbs until ice clicked like glass beads. Snow blew sideways through the porch light. Silas had just banked the stove when he heard a familiar metallic tap. The pie tin. He went to the kitchen window. Sable stood at the foot of the porch steps with both kittens behind her. Snow clung to her whiskers and the dark tips of her ears. Patch tried to bite a snowflake and caught only air. Finch huddled with one paw lifted, offended by weather itself. Sable looked at the porch, then at Silas through the glass. He opened the door only enough to leave the path clear, and stepped back into the kitchen shadows. She came up slowly, not weak now, careful, choosing. Patch hurried to the pear crate, remembered it from earlier days, and dove beneath it so fast the crate rocked. Finch followed more cautiously, then sneezed when dust rose from the boards. Sable stood near the bad step, listening to the storm, and then did something Silas would carry for the rest of his life. She left the kittens under the bench and walked back down into the snow. Only 10 yards, only to the edge of the yard where she could see the lower gate and the ravine beyond. But she left them there, under his porch roof, while she checked the dark. Silas did not move. His hands stayed at his sides, his eyes lowered. His heart felt too large for his ribs. Patch peered out from under the crate with a cobweb on its ear. Finch tucked itself beside the blue blanket's old fold, where their mother had once rested her chin. They were not his to comfort. They were not his to touch. Yet for those few wind-bent minutes, Sable had placed them within the safety of his stillness. When she returned, she gathered them with one low sound. They followed at once, Patch backward for 3 steps, because it was watching the crate, Finch nearly stepping on its own tail. Sable paused at the top step and rubbed her cheek once against the porch post. Then she led them into the snow. Silas stood by the window long after they vanished. Behind him, the stove ticked warmly. Nora's blue mug sat on the sill beside the jar of golden Burrs. Outside, the porch boards held 3 sets of melting prints, and the old house understood that being trusted by a wild thing did not mean being chosen forever. It meant being remembered as safe. Spring returned to Mercer pears the way shy things returned, first by scent. Before the blossoms opened, before the grass turned copperly green, there came one soft morning when the air no longer tasted of iron. It smelled of thawed soil, pear bark, damp leaves, and the faint sweetness waiting inside unopened buds. Snow still lingered in the shadow of the ravine, but the orchard had begun loosening its shoulders. Silas stood on the porch with Nora's blue mug in his hand. He was older by then, though not by much in the calendar's strict opinion. Winter had simply left him feeling more carefully assembled. His knees complained more loudly. His hands had become slower with the latch and the woodbox. Yet he no longer moved like a man walking through rooms that had forgotten him. The pear crate remained beneath the bench, weathered gray now, one corner chewed by a culprit no court could fully prove. The dented pie tin hung on a nail by the door, retired from service but not thrown away. The green apple plate stayed on the lower shelf, wrapped in a towel. The jar of golden Burrs sat beside Nora's mug whenever Silas cleaned the sill, each burr bright and stubborn as memory. Sable had not come to the porch in weeks. That was right. Silas told himself so in the mornings, and by most afternoons he believed it. The kittens were larger now, their legs longer, their faces sharper. Patch had lost some of the round clumsiness and gained a bold, sideways confidence. Finch remained watchful, pausing before every open space, still offended by wind, snow, leaves, and anything else that moved without permission. May's cameras caught them now and then, a blur near the ravine, a small bob tail vanishing behind plum roots, Sable on a moonlit log, eyes bright with attention, her ear notch clear, her body strong again. She had regained weight. Her paw had healed well enough that only a careful observer would notice the slight caution on frozen ground. "She's doing what she was made to do," May said when she brought the photographs. Silas nodded. He did not say that he missed her. May knew anyway. One April afternoon, Theo came by with a new gate spring and a story about seeing Patch near the ditch. He had something in his mouth, Theo said, tightening the screw while Silas held the hinge. Couldn't tell what. Probably important. Most things are to Patch. Theo grinned. He was taller than the fence rail now, and trying not to show how pleased that made him. Anika had sent lemon cookies in a tin and a note saying none were for wildlife, including teenagers who behaved like raccoons. Silas read it aloud. Theo took 2 cookies and said, "Unclear wording." The laugh that came from Silas surprised him with its ease. Later, after Theo left, Silas walked the orchard alone. Buds dotted the pear branches like small green thoughts. These had not yet arrived, but the air seemed to be preparing for them. Near Old Soldier, he stopped to touch the 4 claw marks Sable had left before the first disappearance. The scars in the bark had darkened, but stayed visible. Not all wounds vanished. Some became part of the tree. He walked on toward the lower fence, careful where the ground sloped. At the place where the ravine path began, he saw it, a golden burr in the spring grass. Only one. It clung to a blade near the trail, bright against new green. Silas crouched slowly, knees cracking. He did not pick it up at once. He looked around first. The orchard held still. Then a shape moved beneath the wild plum. Sable stood partly hidden in shadow, her spotted coat blending with branches and last year's leaves. She watched him without alarm. Not tame, never tame. Her body was angled toward the ravine, ready to leave whenever leaving became necessary. Behind her, 2 younger bobcats waited. Patch had a dry leaf stuck to one shoulder. Finch sat with both front paws together, solemn and narrow-eyed, as if judging the entire season. Silas lowered his gaze. "Well," he said softly, "you made it through." Sable's ear turned. The crescent notch caught the light. For a breath, the orchard seemed to hold every season at once. The rain-dark night at the porch, the blue blanket, the empty days, the return through burr grass, the winter storm when she had left her kittens beneath his roof while she checked the dark. Then Sable did something small. She stepped forward, lowered her head, and rubbed her cheek against Old Soldier's low trunk, right beside the old claw marks. After that, she looked once toward Silas and blinked, slowly, only once. Then she turned and slipped back toward the ravine. Patch followed, losing the leaf halfway and pouncing on it before remembering to keep up. Finch looked at Silas a moment longer, sneezed at a drifting pear petal, and vanished after the others. Silas stayed crouched until his legs insisted he rise. He picked up the golden burr then, carefully, with 2 fingers through his handkerchief. Its hooks were sharp. Its color was still warm. It had come from the same wild cut beyond the ravine, but it no longer felt only like warning. It felt like proof. Proof that danger had been crossed. Proof that a frightened mother had survived. Proof that the orchard had been marked into a map of safety and passing, not possession. That evening, Silas placed the burr in the jar with the others. He did not close the lid right away. For a while he stood by the window, watching dusk settle among the pear trees. The bad porch step creaked in the cooling air. The lantern waited unlit beside the door. Nora's blue mug held the last amber light of day along its chipped rim. The house was quiet, but it was no longer empty in the same old way. Outside, somewhere beyond the lower fence, a wild mother moved through spring grass with 2 young shadows behind her. Inside, Silas washed 1 cup, folded Theo's note into the drawer, and left the porch light on until the stars came out. The years would soften the sharper parts of the story, as years often did. The fear would not stay as fear forever. It would become a cold morning remembered from the safety of a warm chair. The empty porch would become a pause in the telling, not an ending. The golden burrs in the jar would fade from bright straw to pale wheat, but they would still catch the light when evening leaned through the kitchen window. Silas would keep fixing the lower gate. He would keep stepping around the bad porch board until one summer he finally replaced it, saving the old piece behind the shed for reasons he never explained. The pear crate would one day split at the corner and still remain under the bench. The blue blanket square would never come back from the wild, and that was right too. Some gifts were not returned because they had gone exactly where they were needed. If you have stayed with Silas, with Sable, with Patch and Finch, thank you for walking slowly through this orchard with them. May you remember the quiet truth they left behind, that love does not always ask to hold on. Sometimes it simply leaves a porch light burning, a gate repaired, a safe path through the dark. And somewhere, when spring grass moved in the wind, a mother bobcat still knew the shape of that place. She knew the old pear tree. She knew the porch that had once smelled of rain, chicken, cedar, and mercy. She knew the house where no hand reached too soon. So rest now. Let the orchard grow dim. Let the golden burrs sleep in their jar beside the chipped blue mug. Let the last sound be wind moving gently through pear branches, and 3 wild shadows passing safely beyond the fence. End of story. Sleep gently, friends.